So hello and welcome to our latest episode of In Conversation. I'm joined by Andy Duke, our Head of Design and Development, and Will Garbutt, our CRO and UX Manager, to talk about user testing. So to get us started, user testing is a term we hear a lot, and there seems to be a lot of different perspectives on what it entails. So let's get started by asking what we actually mean by the term user testing.
It's one of those terms that's really, really broad, and it covers lots and lots of things. That's one of the things that makes it so difficult to talk about sometimes, because it can mean so many different things. In a really, really broad sense, it is just any kind of testing or research that you do that involves users of your website, whoever they are. But it covers things like you've got lab-based user testing, you've got tree testing, card sorting. They're all different types of what falls under that kind of big area of user testing as a blanket term. So in a simple sense, any kind of testing or research that involves your users is the easiest way to think about it before you get into really, really specific definitions.
Okay.
Yeah, it's basically just getting feedback from people that are going to use your website rather than relying on what your own personal opinion is. It's getting the actual users of the website to have a look, have a play around with the site and get them to tell you what they think of it.
Yeah. Okay, so when we've been, personally when I've been looking around and doing a bit of research on user testing, I think there's a lot of conversation about the complexities of it, which I think can often put quite a lot of brands off. Obviously there will be many, many benefits, so if you were speaking to a brand, what would you explain to them as the kind of key benefits of getting involved?
Yeah, well, I think the key one, it takes that personal opinion completely out of the equation.
Okay.
As you said before, you're getting real feedback from real users rather than just relying on what your CEO thinks or what the person who built the website thinks. You're actually going out there and talking to customers and saying, right, what do you think of this website? Is it doing what you want it to do?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than relying on sort of internal staff and what they think.
That's the thing with design. A lot of the time it's so subjective. There's no real right answer when it comes to design. So you'll create something, whether it's a new website or an e-commerce page, and it'll be based on what you think the best approach is or what your stakeholder thinks the best approach is. And one of the great things about user testing is it can take all that subjectivity out of the equation. If you can say, I know you thought this button should have been blue, but we tested it and 100 people found actually that it should have been purple. You can't argue with that usually, regardless of how strong that one stakeholder's personal opinion is. You can't argue against 100 people who are actually your target users. So the kind of removal of subjectivity is a really, really useful thing that you get from user testing. But obviously your primary benefit is insight that you wouldn't normally get. You as an individual, whether you're a designer or a copywriter, you will write based on what you know or what you think the page will look like, and a lot of the time you'll get too close to it. You'll get too close to really understand potential pitfalls, and then bringing in users who are seeing things fresh and for the first time will give you that completely alternate perspective that you wouldn't normally have got. And I can't think of a time where we've ran any user testing sessions where we haven't got that one really key bit of insight that you thought, oh my God, I can't believe we didn't spot that. But because we sat down with real website users and they brought their fresh perspective to it, it seems so obvious now. And that's pretty much every time we've run user testing, you always get something like that out of it, don't you?
Yeah, it gives you that whole list of new issues or new ideas for what you're going to test in the future, rather than just relying on what you think after staying at the same website for weeks on end.
Yeah.
You get, as Andy said, that fresh perspective of people just seeing it in either a real life scenario or coming at it from a completely different user focused perspective that although we try and simulate that ourselves when it comes to designing, you can't really always put yourself in the mind of that specific user that you're trying to target.
You tend to always find that you'll have a certain set of phrases or ways you talk about your own products for your brand, and that's very rarely the exact same way that your customers or your users will talk about it. You might call your product by a certain name, and that's not always the way that users will speak about them. And that's a great thing you get from user testing, is that fresh perspective on phraseology and how to talk about certain things or sections of your website or products or phrases, anything like that. Once you remove that kind of internal perspective that you get as the person who built the website or the stakeholder that requested it to be designed, it opens up a whole new fresh perspective of a much better UX.
It's a really interesting point because I guess the people that you also choose for your user testing are going to be very important. So in terms of the persona types that you bring into the user testing platform, I think that's obviously something that really needs to be considered as well.
Yeah, there's two schools of thought, and this is where Will and I occasionally disagree. There's the argument that says any user testing is better than none.
Yeah.
You know, showing it to anybody is better than not showing it to anybody.
Yeah.
And then that invariably tends to be more what's called guerrilla user testing, where it's just kind of grabbing some people in your office and saying, what do you think of this? Not mapping, like you say, exactly to what persona types for your target demographic is. And the other school of thought is if you're not testing with the exact users that match your target users, then it's a risk. And I don't think either perspective is exactly right or wrong.
Yeah, there's definitely a middle ground. I think it depends what you're testing really. If you're doing some basic usability things like people's ability to click specific buttons or finding any kind of bugs, then it's fine pretty much to test anyone.
Okay.
But if you've got a really specific target audience, say you're designing a website aimed at the elderly, for example, if you test that with a load of millennials, then they're going to approach it in a completely different way to what your real users are going to do. So you might have some features and functionality which they absolutely love, put that in front of your real target market, and suddenly they don't have a clue how to use it. So there is, I suppose, some examples where it could do more harm than good, but at the same time, it's I suppose it's quite easy to argue that finding some of those basic usability flaws is better than not even trying to do it in the first place.
If you're mindful of the potential pitfalls of not testing with people who are exactly like your users, I think just any type of testing is good to get another person's perspective. Just gets you over that hurdle of, if you're the person who's designed or built that specific page, you just get too close to it. You can't help but get too close to all the different components and elements that build up a page, and you need someone who's seeing it in its entirety for the first time. And that's where just it can be as simple as grabbing someone in the office and saying, have you got 5 minutes, would you mind just looking at this on my laptop for a second, because they're seeing it for the first time. And that type of guerrilla user test is really useful just to get a fresh perspective. But yeah, being mindful of if they are your target audience or not is really, really important.
Yeah.
And it comes back to the phraseology, like you mentioned earlier. I think people refer to things in completely different ways, and that could be based on a whole number of factors. It could be upbringing, it could be which part of the country you're from, it could be demographics, it could be age. So as long as you take that into account when you're testing things, I think doing any kind of user testing does help get to a certain level, but in order to really, really get the benefits, I think making it specific to your target market is pretty key.
Yeah. I mean, I think the benefits, are very clear from the conversation. So, we often find, or we read about many brands that just launch a product or a new experience, and then they just tend to test it post-launch. Why do you guys think that brands aren't doing user testing?
Well, I think cost is one of the main things, or perceived cost and complexity, really. I think people think you've got to do it in a lab, you've got to get specific users in, you've got to pay professionals to do it, and in their head all these things keep adding up and they think it's going to cost lots and lots and lots. When in reality there's a few ways you can kind of circumnavigate the costs or do it a bit more cost effectively as you go along. So I think that's definitely the key reason why, also the main barrier to entry that people perceive before actually getting involved in something like this.
You can see why there's that kind of perceived complexity with user testing, because all you got to do is just any kind of Google search around user testing, and all you get back is complex methodologies and theoretical frameworks is the best way to do it, and all that stuff's brilliant. It's really important, particularly if you're a professional, to understand all the different theoretical approaches and different methodologies that make up a really well created lab-based testing scenario. But again, there are ways to use a test on a really, really small scale to get some of those really, really small wins out that don't have that really, really difficult barrier to entry that you might perceive if you look into it on a general scale and you see all that kind of scary theory and methodology stuff. So there's that barrier to entry that normally puts a lot of people off. And the other thing that we found in the past is time is usually what prohibits. When you're doing a timeline, particularly for, let's say, a new product launch or a site launch, and you've already got a launch date in mind, and you're trying to find a path to get you there in the easiest way. If you plonk 2 or 3 user testing checkpoints in there, and each one might take 2 or 3 days, and you elongating the timeline, a lot of people when they're looking to de-scope things, will sometimes look at user testing as the easiest thing to de-scope because it doesn't have any dependencies on getting to build the site. It's just in theory, it's just an improvement on it. But that's a big problem, and a lot of the time you can find actually if you can keep timeline it is, but overlay user testing on top of it, so you're not stopping everything and waiting for user testing to happen. It can be happening concurrently and in conjunction with it, and that's can get you around that initial perceived time barrier that stops a lot of people doing it.
Yeah, and I think another thing is a lot of people think they don't need to do it. They might have done a lot of customer surveys, or they might think they know the customer better than anyone, so why should we bother paying more money to actually ask them what they think?
Yeah,
so,
I know what my users think.
Yeah, exactly. Or if people think they are their users, which is quite a common mistake that a lot of brands make. I think because they might already have that quantitative data to back up some of the reasons they've done things in the past, they might just think, oh, why would we bother showing it to people? We know what's best for them. We know our customers better than they know themselves. That kind of attitude.
I guess it's quite interesting from a performance perspective in user testing, but it's also you need to try and understand the feelings of the people that you undertaking the user testing with. So I guess that might be something that's brought up in separate market research from a brand, but I guess there's no, it's much better to have somebody in a room so you can actually look at how they're engaging with the site and actually see all those kind of triggers and feelings that might not necessarily be written down on the page.
Exactly. I think people, when they're filling questionnaires, it's almost like they're telling you what they think they want you to hear. Whereas if you're sat down with someone and they're going through a website, they can't hide that initial feeling of either annoyance or happiness as they're going through a specific task on the website. So it helps sort of bring out that more human aspect to it that you don't necessarily get when you're just either ticking boxes in a questionnaire or looking at a predefined persona that someone else has come up with.
Yeah, that's why it's really great to pair user testing with kind of hard statistical analysis, because what that kind of database analysis can do, where it can highlight where problems are in a web journey. You can say we're losing a lot of people on this particular page, or this page isn't converting particularly well. We've seen that from the stats. And then if you layer user testing on top of that, what that can sometimes give you is the why. You found the problem, which is the what, but why are we losing people on this page? What's ruining conversion on this particular product page? And then if you sit down usually with as few as 5 or 6 participants, you can quite quickly get to the problem of the why. As Will said, you can usually read it on people's faces.
Yeah.
I think that comes back from the barriers. I think people assume you've got to do user testing with like tens and tens of people, when in reality, between 5 and 7 pretty much gets you 90% of all the issues you're going to get. So it's not like you have to do weeks and weeks worth of user testing with specific users. You can just pretty much get 5 people, half a day to a day, and then that's going to get you a whole load of really useful and insightful feedback that you wouldn't necessarily have got in any other way.
And I think going back to your point, Andy, about the kind of timeline and adding those specific user testing points in throughout the journey, I guess the irony is that the earlier you identify those problems, the less expensive they are to fix.
Exactly,
so the barriers to entry in terms of cost and time are kind of negated if you do that.
Yeah, it's really good to test with things at a prototype phase, where you might have just created a flat design, but there's tools now where you can quite quickly create a clickable prototype where you are just testing a flat design. And then if you identify a really big problem on, say, one of your product pages, all you're doing is wasting maybe an hour fixing that design rather than a week fixing a built version of that page. So getting the user testing planned at the right phase for what output you're trying to get is key as well.
Okay. And what would you recommend? When's the right time? When's the right time to do user testing? Do we need to be thinking about it before we've even kind of started the project, when we're planning it from the beginning? Do we need to work on it from a prototype version like you mentioned?
It depends what you're trying to get out of user testing. So if you're trying to identify what you need to fix, you want to be testing your current website, putting people through the current web experience and identifying areas for improvement or where the problems are. Equally, you might be looking to validate what you've created in terms of a new website. So you've built a new website, and then you want to put it through a round of testing just to validate your assumptions in terms of what the new user journey is. Or there's like a sense checking phase midway through. So it really kind of varies what you're trying to get out of things, but usually it tends to be, we want to validate what we're proposing as a new website. And if that's what you're trying to get out of user testing, it's usually better to do it at a prototype phase where things look kind of like what the final product's going to look like, but not so late that it costs you to rebuild things. But again, there's you can do it really at any stage. You can do user testing with paper prototypes. People do all the time, so it'll be like a sketched version of a site, and you'll sit people down with a sketch of a website and say, if this was a website, where would you click? And people are pointing at it, like where they point the mouse. That's really great because you can kind of edit as you go in with a felt tip pen, and equally people do a lot of really, really robust user testing with a final developed platform. So it's wherever you can fit it in to get the best out of it, I found, which is a terrible answer to that question because the answer is all the time, but it's whenever you can get it in.
Okay. I guess there'll be lots of people that might be watching this that'd be like, okay, we're kind of midway through a project, but that's also okay.
Yeah, you can literally test at whatever phase you're at. If you've just got a sketch or a wireframe or a design or a prototype or a final build, you can test any one of those. All you've got to do is, when you sit down with people to test with them, you just say, this isn't going to look like a final website. Don't expect it to be a final website. And, don't worry about that. Just talk to me honestly about where you would click, what you think these particular links would do, that kind of stuff. And it's relatively easy. People are quite accepting of being told that this isn't a final thing. A lot of the time you get better results when you're testing something that people know isn't a final version. They know it's a little bit rough and ready around the edges. You tend to get people a little bit more willing to point out flaws, I've found sometimes.
Yeah, I think they feel as though they're not critiquing something final, so they're more likely to be sort of more honest around things, rather than they think someone's taken the time and effort to build something, and then they're a bit potentially apprehensive around saying, oh, don't like that. Some people are completely the other way and will just go to town on terms of what's wrong.
Nice.
And I think that's one of the key things to take into account when you're actually performing and when they test themselves. Sort of, you've got to take that personal part of it out of it to say, listen, you're not offending me by giving your feedback on this website. It's something else, so sort of take that out of the equation. But I think going back to the original point, it's never too late to start testing. It could be on a final site, it could be on a site that's just about to go live, or it could be, as Andy said, in that sketching phase, when you're trying to come up with those ideas for some initial either features or functionality. It's never too late and never too early really to start showing it to proper people and saying, right, this is what we're trying to achieve. Would you be able to perform this task?
And I guess going back to that personality point is where the questions will be really important. So the way that you phrase the questions are going to be important, and I wonder if that's sometimes a barrier to entry. People think, oh my gosh, I'm not a market researcher, I don't have a background in research. How do I even start going about asking those questions?
Yeah, and I think the key thing is just try and make it as natural as possible. I think what you're trying to replicate in user testing is basically someone sat at home and doing it as if they do it, not in laboratory conditions. So the more natural and almost the less you can say, the better. You almost need to make them feel completely easy. We just sat there going along however they do it. They might get interrupted by a dog or a baby because that's what they do in real life, and you want to understand how they're going to overcome those barriers and how the website can help them through that journey of what they're trying to achieve in the most natural setting possible. So they don't want it to feel like they're being interviewed, really. They want it to feel as though they're just sat there going about their normal daily routine and going through the website as normal.
Yeah, a lot of the time when we're conducting a test, we'll set up the room that we're using for the testing as close as we can to a living room or wherever people will be using that particular website. We might sit on a sofa rather than a desk. Anything you can do to put people in the mindset they'll be in when they would actually be using that website is what you're trying to aim for. And one of the other things we do is we have what we call a discussion guide that we create beforehand, which is almost like a script of what questions and what tasks we're going to go through. But the really key part at the beginning of that discussion guide is putting people at ease and pointing out that they're not the ones being tested, it's the website. We, as people who are facilitating the test, weren't involved in the design, so don't worry about upsetting me as I didn't build this. You can be as nasty as you want about it, I'm not going to start crying. Just little things like that put people at ease. You find you get better and better results rather than, as Will says, someone feel like they're in kind of market research and I don't know what to say. You tend to find people give you the answer that they think you want if you're not careful. And as long as you steer things away from that, you get really, really good results.
And a lot of the good stuff comes from just the chat you have either before or after. I think they've gone through this half hour of user testing where they think, oh, I'm being tested here. Then you just have a chat about how everything was and they'll come out with something that you then sort of try and dig a bit deeper into and try and explore and say, oh, it's interesting you said that. When you're going through the website, you didn't really mention that. Do you want to go back and have a look and tell me what you think about it? So
they're much more at ease, aren't they?
Exactly, It's a lot of it's about making them feel, as we said before, in a natural environment and just making them feel as if they're doing it normally rather than in a big sort of test and feel like they're in an exam.
So finally, what would be your number one tip? And I know this is going to probably be a bit tricky, so we've probably got about 15 tips that we want to share, but I'll throw it to you, Will. What's going to be your number one tip then if someone wants to just get stuck into user testing?
Well, I'd say it's never too late to start testing.
Okay.
I think I'd go with. I think a lot of people might think they're building a brand new website, so why bother testing the old website? When in reality, doing that can help you identify some of the things you definitely want to move through to the new website, and some of the things you definitely want to get rid of or try and improve.
Competitors as well. It's really good sometimes to test a competitor's website as well as your own, because you can get just as good insight from how people use your competitor's website as how they use your
That's
own.
an interesting point.
But yeah, definitely never too late to start testing.
Okay.
Just showing it to anyone or starting small and scaling up is fine. Testing at any stage throughout the process, but just basically just do some testing.
Okay.
In short. Yeah.
Andy, anything to add
I
to
think
that one?
one of the tips that I always try and pass on to people when they're starting to do testing is make sure you involve senior stakeholders in it as well.
Okay.
Testing as it's in itself is really challenging to do, but one of the reasons it fails sometimes is because it's almost done in silo. You'll do the testing, you'll use the results yourself, but what we found a lot of success with in the past is involving really, really senior stakeholders and saying, this is a video of someone using the new website, do you want to watch it? Or, this is the findings that we got. And what you find is it gets you really, really great buy-in into potential changes, particularly if you're asking to change the direction of a project at a late phase, you need that senior buy-in. So I think one of the great tips I found is involve really senior people in the testing.
Yeah.
Particularly because video output's really, really great to share with people sometimes.
I've been in meetings where you've gone through 20 slides of Google Analytics data that points to this thing being wrong. Like, you need to fix this. No, everyone glazes over, no one really cares. You show them a 15-second clip of some person not being able to click on a button, and they'll instantly get on the phone to the development
really
team
powerful
and say,
stuff, isn't
it?
fix this now.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Which makes, I guess, your lives as professionals a lot easier.
Dead easy,
Try and
yeah.
sell them the changes, which is great.
I think the basic one is you're trying to improve your website for your users, and if you try and do that without talking to your users or completely discount the ability to talk to your users, it feels like you're missing a massive trick of being able to properly optimise what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah. So a huge thank you to Andy and Will for their time. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and be the first to get all of our latest episodes. And of course, if you've got any questions for the guys, please just comment below. Thanks for watching.